that there's snow on the ground, we are getting good guests here on In the Podcast. And it starts with my co-host, who's, I'm going to say he's a guest just because he deserves all the compliments. Topher Cochran, how are we doing tonight, man?
Swell. You mentioned snow. It's been 85 down here.
You're the worst.
So, yeah, I'm sorry to rub it in, but yeah, it's kind of weird when I see snow.
Oh my God, dude, I can't stand it. It just seems like every day I just want to go back to like throw around a
They just
pair
had
of
a bad
shorts.
storm, right? They just had a big storm.
Yep.
In the Northeast.
It was literally like 5 inches overnight, which I guess isn't too bad, but like for the first one of the year, like usually you can kind of like gear up, prepare, you know, your snow blower is gone a couple times. But the thing I dislike the most, and I feel like it's very underrated, is I can't just slide on shoes anymore. I gotta actually, you know, put on shoes in time. I like, you know, I've never been a flip-flop person, but you know, like just to run to the car or run to the store, sure, I'll rock flip-flops and socks. I don't care, but now it's all right. I gotta put on my shoes, and for some reason for me that is just such a struggle, and I think I'm ready to move.
Well, there's plenty of homes down in South Florida ready for you, but as of now, man, like, so I noticed this when I was on Twitter, how the Dolphins have kind of made this little push for certain players for the Pro Bowl. Yep. Laremy Tunsil, Kiko Alonso, and Xavier Howard. I mean, we agree with those players, right? That those are the players that need to be pushed for the Pro Bowl to represent this team.
Sure. For a second, I thought you said like need to be on the roster, which I guess is.
No.
But yeah, like, maybe even Jason Sanders. I mean, which is, you know, a Dolphins staple to have some special teams player make it. Shout out Michael Thomas, who had an interception today. But yes. So those are about the three guys. Maybe if you want to do Juwan James, you know what? We should have Frank Gore. Frank Gore for the Pro Bowl.
Start the campaign. Start the Frank Gore. Start the Frank Gore campaign to Honolulu. I mean, not Honolulu, but Orlando.
Let's bring them to all three: Orlando, Hawaii, and Honolulu. You know what?
Just trot them out on a little tour.
It's gonna be great because tell me we can't picture the. Do you remember Cal Ripken Jr.'s last All-Star game where him and A-Rod switched positions? A-Rod went to third and Cal Ripken went to short just because like A-Rod won it vote-wise, but they still started Ripken. I think they should do that with Gore, where if he made it, he'd definitely start at fullback, but then I don't know, whoever is on his team is just gonna, like, Alvin Kamara will be like, hey man, you take this first snap. I could see that happening.
That'd be pretty cool. I mean, you know, it's just when I saw those players, I was kind of like bummed out. But, like, at least, you know, like, he just caught me by surprise when they said Laremy Tunsil has allowed 0 sacks. I didn't know that. You know, he's toned down, and he's you know, his penalties have kind of, you know, I guess those mental mistakes have kind of gone away, and he's just been quietly really, really good.
Yeah, you're right. That was the one concern we had, and those penalties have totally disappeared.
And, you know, sticking with the offensive line, you know, it seems like whenever they get that one moment to get in, they always play like a disaster. But then when you give them time to prepare, specifically like Sam Young and Zach Stirrup, they're not bad. Right. And which I don't know, you know, you credit the offensive line coach for that, and, you know, in Gase, but it's, you know, the offensive line has not been a complete disaster this year when they're healthy, like when they have time to prepare, when when they're not being forced to jump into a game.
Yeah, there weren't really too many times where I really want to blame the offensive line, you know, when they started 3-0. It was mentioned before how, you know, offensive linemen don't necessarily like playing with Russell Wilson, and now we could talk about how the Seahawks offensive line has never been good, but that's kind of what we saw early in the season, where there wasn't a really great pocket presence from Tannehill, where some of the sacks were just like quarterback sacks, where he just didn't get out of the pocket, and then Osweiler had like maybe 2 games of magic, and then it turned into he was running into pressures, which just kind of mind-boggling to me. So the offensive line, I don't think has been an excuse this year, and even if we want to say last year, yes, it could be better, it should be better, yes, but to see like it's a hamstringing your entire season, I gotta disagree with that.
Yeah, it hasn't ruined the season. What's ruined the season is injuries. You know, Jason Leisure came out with an article, you know, later, you know, this past week on how you got to give Gase more time because of the amount of injuries that has happened to this team. And it's true. Like, this bye week is so important because it allows players to get healthy. We might have our starting quarterback finally. We don't know yet, but like there's a chance that he'll be ready against Indianapolis. And if he does, then like that's another addition to this team to make a late playoff run and eventually win the Super Bowl.
That's a perfect segue because now we are going to jump into three-time Super Bowl winner Michael Lombardi, who talks about a team who's on the rise this year, some of the issues he's seen with the Dolphins, and what it is like working with the great trio of Walsh, uh, Al Davis, and the one and only Bill Belichick. So catch you on the flip side. And we are now joined by a man of many titles, Super Bowl champion, NFL executive, and now he's an author. So we are joined by Michael Lombardi. We're gonna jump right in and talk about your book a little bit here, the Gridiron Genius. When did you decide you wanted to actually start writing a book and put down all this knowledge you've gained from working with people like Walsh, Davis, and Belichick?
Well, I knew I was fortunate enough when I started out my career working for Coach Walsh and being able to learn from him and kind of shaped my thinking in the NFL. And then, my next job, I was introduced to Bill Belichick in 1991, and instantly I knew he was going to be a great coach, even though we didn't achieve the Super Bowl championship in Cleveland. And then I always wanted to work for Al Davis. So for me, when I was at the Raiders, and I kind of felt like it was going to fall apart. Oh, when you get to a certain level in the NFL, it's tough to change jobs. So I took a writing class just because I thought I wanted to understand how to get everything on paper and put this story together. And that was in 2006. And, I didn't start writing it until 10 years later in 2016. The book was always going to be titled The Bill of Rights, which would have been about Walsh and Belichick, the Bills of Rights. But,
Perfect.
I needed to expand it into the Gridiron Genius, which is not about me. It's about the people I've worked for.
What was it like? You mentioned you've been working with Belichick since '91. What was it like trying to ask him to write the foreword? I know you guys are friends, so I'm sure it wasn't too awkward. But what was that process like?
That was pretty easy. I just said, Bill, would you mind writing a foreword for me for this book? He said no, and he said, when do you need it? And I said, probably like the beginning of March. Okay, and then 10 days into March, he said, I said, I need that intro, and he said, tell me about it, and then he wrote it. It was pretty easy, actually. It's, with things with Bill are pretty easy. There's not a lot of wasted time when you're talking with Bill. It's football. It's the things that are on the plate, and he gets to the point, I get to the point, and we go to the next thing.
How much has the game changed from when you started in with the Niners to right now?
I think it's changed so much. I mean, in some ways it's changed. People think the West Coast offense is smash seven curl or shallow crosses, as Joe Tessitore likes to say on television all the time. Here comes a shallow cross. He loves it. But I think more than anything, I think, the philosophy of football back in those early days, Walsh was a believer in complementary football. He wanted to have the West Coast offense to establish the lead. He threw the ball to establish the lead. He knew that running the ball was only going to get field goals. But he also knew we needed a complementary defense. So when we went from Fred Dean, we needed to find another Fred Dean, and we found Charles Haley. And so that element of the game is really relevant today. Offense scores, defense prevents scores, but you've got to be able to rush the passer, and you must play from the front. I mean, the greatest example is this Eagle team this year. They look like a ragtag outfit, but last year, they scored. They led the league in first quarter points scored. They were second in first half point differential. And this year, they can't get a lead to save themselves. They played this whole game from behind against the Saints tonight. So that part of the game hasn't changed. Now, obviously, we're seeing more quarterbacks. We're seeing shotgun. We're seeing more read options. We're seeing the RPOs. But that really hasn't changed because when Walsh sat on the team bus, he would often draw single wing plays. And, his idea of how to execute and what he wanted to do was always look back in history and bring it and make it current. So to some degree it's changed, but to some degree it stays the same with a different flair.
You mentioned that, especially with the Eagles, I find that to be really interesting how, you're 100% right where they always seem to go out to a quick lead, and it's so much better when you can have, your front four pin their ears back. What was the biggest factor for your three Super Bowl teams in 84 Niners, 14 Patriots, and 16 Patriots? Because you need a lot to go right. We see every year, one injury can kind of derail a season. What was so special about those three teams, and did anything really stand out, maybe like halfway through the season where it was kind of going through everyone's minds that, we have a really good shot here of, making the jump?
Well, I think all those three teams, everybody on the team liked each other. There was teams that worked together. There was no disagreement. Everybody was the team. There was a really good feeling in the locker room. It was people respected your job. People respected, what the players did. There was a mutual respect between player, coach, and front office, and that's been consistent. I've never been around a team that ever has not gotten along that's won. So I think that's number one. I think when you look at the first team in 1984 that won the Super Bowl, Super Bowl 19, it was interesting. The Dolphins, we were such a situational nickel team that the Dolphins actually tried to go no huddle in that Super Bowl game to keep us from substituting, which was, that took probably another 10 years before that really became, became relevant in the league. So the age of specialization in 84, that's first Super Bowl I won, really started the age of specialization.
Since you've worked with plenty of teams, how is it important to have the right coach for the right roster? And what's your opinion on Adam Gase?
Well, I think the coach is going to be the leader of the organization. I think that, to me, I've worked in personnel, and I say this: football is different than basketball. It's different than baseball. The general manager needs to have a background role, not a front and center role. The team has to run through the coach. It's the only way you'll get the team's attention. Sean Payton, that team runs through Sean Payton. The New England Patriots, that team runs through Bill Belichick. I think that's really what happens. I mean, there'll be certain situations. The Dallas Cowboys are 5-5, and certainly they'll spike. But ultimately, the culture is built really on coming from the head coach. And I think Adam Gase he's trying to build a culture. He's got rid of a lot of guys off that team that were not helping the culture. And I'm not sure they're as talented as they've been in the past, but he's kind of gotten more players. I think it's going to be a work in progress for him. And I think he's going to have to find his right team to kind of fit in there. And it's going to take some time. I mean, obviously, this quarterback situation for them is going to always be a concern until they get it nailed right. I'm not sure it's right with Tannehill. I know it's not right with what I call the heist, Brock Osweiler.
There's no doubt about that. So, you spent a lot of time in this division, 2014 through 2016 with the Patriots. If you say you were the GM of one team in the AFC East 3 years from right now, we know the Jets just drafted a rookie quarterback, so did the Bills. The Dolphins might try be in the process of building their culture, and we know what it's like in New England, but there's always every year it's who's retiring, who's not. 3 years from now, which team of these four would you like to be the GM of, based on what's kind of built right now?
Well, I think it'd have to be the Jets, because I think Sam Darnold can be a good player. I think right this year he hasn't been a good player for them. He's turned the ball over 14 interceptions is too much. But I think, 3 years from now, if Tom Brady's still going to be playing football, that would be hard for me to answer. The Patriots don't have that. I would have easily said the Patriots if Jimmy Garoppolo were still on their team, because I think Jimmy Garoppolo would be the best quarterback in the division. But they traded Jimmy, and that's passed. So I would go with the Jets, because I think Darnold, when he can get a better line in front of him, when they can do some things to help him, I think scheme-wise, I think he could certainly do it. He's got to protect the ball much better. But the Jets have to find a way and have to find an offense that fits him. That's the most important thing for quarterbacks. Quarterbacks are like stadiums in baseball. You got to build a team around what the quarterback can do.
What's the hardest decision you've had to make as a GM, and how have relationships with players impacted those decision making?
Well, like I said earlier, the relationships you have with players are really about mutual respect. You have a job to do, and you can't lie to players. I think that's the number one thing. If you try to lie to a player, it's going to come back and bite you. You got to be honest. You got to say, hey, look, here's the way we see it. Here's the decision we made. Here's where it's going. You can't pass the buck. You can't make the players want to like you. Belichick told me back in 1991, look, if you want the players to like you, you're probably in the wrong business. And he's right. And so, for me, that's really important. And I think what you have to do is be honest, and you have to respect what they believe in. I would never go in a locker room when I was a general manager, because I think that's their sacred ground. I think that's where they feel most comfortable. And I think you have to respect that. So you respect their boundaries, and hopefully they'll respect yours.
You recently retweeted a quote from your book that goes about Walsh talking about, how every team wants to be like the next Patriots, build the right organization the right way. And it mentions how there's a lot of teams that can't cook up the right culture, or they might not do a complete overhaul. They might try to cut corners. What's the warning sign you see? Because we titled this podcast "In the Hunt," because with the Dolphins, they're always going to finish between that 7 and 9 wins, somewhere in there, maybe 6, maybe 10. But they're always right in that zone where you don't get a high draft pick, but you're not having the success you want from a franchise. So what are some of the big warning signs you see when a franchise is kind of sputtering in mediocrity, I guess?
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear. I think accountability is the number one. I think you have to be accountable. You have to be able to evaluate your own self. I think that's the critical component of building an organization. Teams tend to lie to themselves. There's a great line in one of Jackson Brown's songs. He says, "We forget about the losses and exaggerate the wins." And that happens in the NFL daily. You forget about the losses, you exaggerate the wins. In New England, they don't exaggerate the wins, and they never forget the losses. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really going to be critical. And I think when you look at teams that kid themselves, that keep going down the same road, like you just take Miami. Do you really think Ryan Tannehill's A, going to stay healthy, and B, does he have enough talent to lead you and win a Super Bowl? I think you got to be really honest and face that decision. And when you don't face that decision and you're not willing to accept the answer to that, then that's when you have all sorts of problems, and it becomes a systematic organizational problem, which then becomes a real bad culture problem because the players know you're not being honest.
Since you mentioned the Dolphins and, being fans down here, we've kind of just been frustrated with the whole situation. Going back to when he first got injured late in the season, and they had Jake Cutler last year, and now he's this year. He got hurt. Brock Osweiler came in. What would you do if you were in Miami's position? Would you, keep Tannehill and try to get him to take a pay cut, or would you just kind of just start the whole thing over and draft someone and try, get another veteran to kind of ease the new quarterback in?
I would do whatever it took to get a quarterback. I would have to feel like I would get whatever it took to get a quarterback. I would find one and decide who it was best fit and go get one. And I wouldn't bring, just because they know Adam's offense doesn't necessarily mean they know what to do. Some players are playing because they know what to do, not because they can do it. It's what I call in my book the bus driver players. They know how to get the bus to the stadium, but once they get to the stadium, they're not very good. And so, I think you have to do that. I think there's nothing more important than the quarterback in the organization. I think you have to, and for me, Miami, and I kid about it all the time. Mike Tannenbaum, the general manager, loves wide receivers, can't wait to draft receivers. His offensive line's a mess. This game always comes down to 3 areas. How good's your quarterback, how good's your D-line, how good's your O-line. If you're not good in those 3 areas, you're not going to win. I don't care how good your receivers are. You can draft receivers every year. You can have the best running backs. But you've got to put all your resources, time, and effort into building both lines. If you don't have those lines really to the level that they can compete, the Saints are the perfect example. The Saints have always had skill, but now they have a dominant offensive line that controls the game. And so all these receivers that they have look a lot better because the quarterback can get rid of the ball, put the ball in the right spot, and their offensive line can dominate. So for me, if I were running the Miami Dolphins, I would try to start at that point. Fix the quarterback, fix both lines.
As a fan, we see it to be a little concerning when we hear that the Dolphins at the trade deadline, we're shopping Parker, we're not shopping Parker. You hear Amari Cooper goes for a first-round pick. You see, there's talk that they could have traded Cameron Wake, and when you see what Fowler was traded for on such a short deal, are there any pieces on the Dolphins roster when you look at, all right, if we need to move up to get a quarterback, they should have, tried to move at the trade deadline, or even that they might try to trade in the offseason to kind of get some sort of war chest to move up for a quarterback?
I think it's going to be hard. Look, the Dolphins always make me laugh. Every time I put a report out there, remember, they weren't trading Jarvis Landry.
Exactly,
this, right?
Exactly.
They weren't. We'll never trade. We went to Jarvis, and we told Jarvis we're not going to trade him. Meanwhile, you traded him for a 7th-round pick. Mm-hmm. So, that to me is one of the cultural issues. There's not being honest. You're sitting there, you're coming out saying you're not because you don't want confrontation with the players. Now, I'm not saying you go tell the players you're going to trade them. You just don't respond to the rumor. Don't respond to the rumor. You don't have to dispute the rumor if you're not going to do it. You think the Patriots ever respond to a rumor? They don't. They just go on to. They're not worried about what somebody else is saying. They're worried about what they're doing. So I think to me that's really important. And I think you got to start there, and you got to be really honest with what you're doing.
What do you make of the whole Le'Veon Bell situation? Being someone in the front office, and now you got a player who he's basically he wants to get paid, and he also at the same time is protecting his body.
What would you do? Well, he won $17 million. You know what's funny is nobody's ever mentioned that he was suspended for 4 games for substance abuse. You know, so he has a strike against him. You know, he wants $45 million guaranteed. He wants $17 million. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to pay for that? I think that's going to be an interesting conversation this offseason, especially since if he's still in the program and he's one more strike from being suspended for the whole season. Are you willing to give him $45 million guaranteed? I think you got to look at that. I think the one thing that's been proven out fairly clearly, we see it on San Diego's team with Eckler, and we see it with all backs all over the league, right? We see it that you can find running backs. I mean, Aaron Jones is a 5th-round pick out of UTEP. I mean, frankly, Aaron Jones should be on the Patriots, but that's a whole other story. But the reality of it is, he was a 5th-round pick coming out in the draft. You can find running backs. You know, so for me as a general manager to put $45 million guaranteed, $17 million a year into a running back, I just don't see him. I can't do that.
We'll wrap up here with this one. We're joined by Michael Lombardi, who has been great for us so far. Every year, what I think makes the NFL so special is that we see, you know, every year there's about a 40% turnover rate where we're going to see new teams in the playoffs. Who are some teams from like a GM standpoint you see that are like really on the cusp of being, you know, in the next powerhouse who we might not see this year, but going into the playoff season next year?
You know, I think this Colt team's really good. I mean, the Colts were in a lot of games last year. They had a lot of fourth quarter leads, you know, and so, you know, they let them slip away. This year they closed them out. I mean, they've been in every single game this year with the exception of one. That was the Patriot game on Thursday night. They got blown out of that. But the reality of it is they've been in every game. They just haven't been able to close every game, and they've made mistakes down the stretch. So I think they've come a long way in a year. I think they've done really well. I think they're a team that's going to be reckoned with. This the more they improve all over their base, you know, and I think as they keep going forward.
Gridiron Genius, you can find it on Amazon.com. Class in winning championships and building dynasties in the NFL. Michael Lombardi, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Topher, I was always a Lego builder growing up. You know, you got to start with the firm base. If you want to build a cool tower, you need to start with the base. And the one like really interesting part of talking with Michael Lombardi is the fact that team building, you know, he made it obvious. You need a coach who's going to tell it how it is, and you need a quarterback. First and foremost, you always need a quarterback. So let's fast forward and kind of look at some of the Dolphins' decisions they're going to have this offseason, because it's still the bye week. We're kind of enjoying our Sunday night. Our feet are up. You know, we're cool. It's cool. Everything's cool. So we have decisions to look at on this team, and it kind of starts with what you mentioned. It's pretty interesting here. Is keeping 4 quarterbacks affected roster depth at other positions is a question you rose, and that include the issues we have at like guard and wide receiver. So how about you explain that a little more for us?
Yeah, I mean, they kept Tannehill, Osweiler, Fales, and Luke Falk, and now they have like one guard, you know, with Asiata on the practice squad. But like it just like that's the position that's been depleted is wide receivers. Whether it's week in and week out now, it feels like that there's a new guy and they just signed the new was it Bryce Butler this weekend?
Bryce Butler, who in fact has the same amount of career touchdowns as Devontae Parker.
And it makes me wonder if like has that decision, you know, in week 4 of preseason affected the team now?
With the way you can use the practice squad, I'm going to go ahead and say no, because when you think of the last 9 guys on the roster, they don't even suit up on game days.
Yeah.
And we kind of mentioned it in an earlier show where in the preseason, everyone freaks out about, you know, we have to keep Jonas Gray. Jonas Gray is going to be great, and even though he'd be like our 5th running back. So I don't think I'd really see that as sort of an issue. Keeping 4 quarterbacks is kind of mind-boggling. I get that you want to, you know, test out all these guys, but it's you could see pretty quickly if a quarterback's good or not. We've seen 6 games of Nathan Peterman, who was a 2nd round pick, and he's already been cut. It's just you kind of know right away, and you're just kind of holding around these guys. We think of Brandon Doughty for a couple years, where I don't know if it's necessarily hurting the team, but we could definitely say it's not helping the team.
Yeah, and especially with this team right now, it's like it's just you look at the depth at quarterback, and now we're to the point now where we've seen so much of Brock Osweiler, and we're in reruns now. We saw so much of Matt Moore and Jake Cutler. All right, just put David Fales in now, and we're at that point with Osweiler. All right, let's just put Fales in and see what happens, exactly. Because we know the season is not going anywhere. So put Fails in and let's just run with this guy until the end of the season and start over.
It's going one place in the hunt.
Yeah, that's the best part. We've been getting a lot of pub lately because of the records. Because every team is like 5-5 in the AFC now.
It's that time of the year we're just kind of rubbing our palms because Thanksgiving's rolling around. We got those flow charts of who's in the hunt, baby. It's great because we are literally tied for 6th place right now.
We're in the hunt.
It's perfect. It's beautiful. It is. We can't make it sound any better than that. I'm just like speechless that it just works every season. It just works.
On accident. It just happens.
Is it so on accident? It's actually on purpose.
Probably. And it's probably going to keep going that way. Like if they win against Indianapolis, then they got to go and face Minnesota right after, right?
That's 6-6.
And
Best.
so, like,
I don't know, dude.
like,
Indianapolis, I mean, even
like
Lombardi
right
just
now.
mentioned, they're kind of a powerhouse.
They're playing absurd. Like that whole Andrew Luck thing is gone. Like that whole arm strain, trying to get get acclimated and that rust is gone, right? Like he's back and he looks better than ever.
See, that's the thing because going into the season, like I could joke that Tannehill could have been the best quarterback in this draft class. Kirk Cousins, sure, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But it was mostly Andrew Luck and Tannehill for, like, the first round. I mean, Russell Wilson. That was kind of a loaded draft class. RG3's still around. But no, now that Andrew Luck's back doing this, lighting the world on fire again, Tannehill's the 4th best at literally the best quarterback out of that draft, right?
Yeah, and what was funny is throughout their entire careers, there was always the argument from Dolphins side. I don't know about Indianapolis Colts. I'm sure they know that Andrew Luck is better than Tannehill.
Yeah, they don't waste their time with us.
They don't waste their time, but Dolphin fans have, and I feel like Tannehill, he's not better than Luck. It's pretty obvious, and I feel confident. It's, we know who's better. There is no jury now. Both of them have missed time due to injuries, and both of them have returned back from injuries. And the one dude who came back is playing like a maniac, and it's really annoying because now the Dolphins got to face that guy on the road at times when teams should be peaking.
It's kind of gross looking at the last time these two teams played. Matt Hasselbeck and Charlie Whitehurst beat Miami in Miami with Tannehill at quarterback.
Landry, Parker, like that whole team was absurd in terms of like I was looking at the roster and I just laughed because it was so bad.
Jordan Cameron as your 4th leading receiver.
Oh my God, I forgot about that guy.
Kelvin Shepard as your highest tackler. Yeah, so that's just God. If we have to play another game like that, just freaking kill me. If we lose,
I forgot that game happened. Honestly forgot that game happened.
How can people I get liking Tannehill and wanting to be your quarterback, but how you want to keep defending him over and over again when he's losing to Hasselbeck and Whitehurst and Clipboard Jesus? Give me a freaking break. But that is a great segue into Mike Tannenbaum is kind of falling in love with Justin Herbert. You wrote that down here. And I kind of want to take a step back from that because I don't think it would be just Mike Tannenbaum. And the more you think about it, if this team goes 8-8, Tannenbaum might not even be here, so it doesn't matter who he likes.
Yep.
So I think this might be, as Lombardi kind of mentioned, one guy making all the play calls. And maybe it's not Tannenbaum liking Herbert as much as maybe one Adam Gase.
Probably, and I hope so, because I want Tannenbaum nowhere near these decisions. In fact, like he said it, Lombardi said it perfect. Tannenbaum's a wide receiver guy, and now which it made me think. I was like, interesting. So this guy's got a bad rap for paying players and cap space and all that, kind of ruining it. And now, he tells you that he's a wide receivers guy, and now they need a quarterback. And it was pretty cool. It was badass seeing already that they're looking at Herbert, and I'm sure they're looking at other players as well on top of Herbert at that one specific game. And we're referring to as Tony Pauline's podcast, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes. And
so it was
was
awesome,
seen
man.
at the last game too. Like there's a list where there was 18 games at 18 teams at Herbert's most recent game in the scouting box, and Tannenbaum was one of them.
But this doesn't mean anything unless if Herbert doesn't declare, which like I don't know. I don't want them to trade up for a quarterback. I kind of just want this whole thing to just smooth sail right into misery,
The way I look
and
at
bottom out.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I think you kind of give what's happening right now one more year, and you try a guy like you pay a little more for Teddy Bridgewater on a deal, and then you say, maybe you do like a 3-year deal where it's super guaranteed deal one or year one, and then he balls out, and then you readjust the contract and you ride out into the sunlight, because there aren't a lot of good quarterbacks going into this draft where it's going to be expensive. It's going to be very, very expensive to try to get one of these guys.
Which is, they're past that point now.
Yeah,
unless,
and
unless they lose the rest of the season.
And yet they'd have to do that, and maybe have had to have traded Cameron Wake and Devontae Parker earlier in the season, because I don't think they can afford. Does a team want 3 first-round picks where they're gonna be like mid-tier, or you want like what the Rams did, where Washington had one good season and then the Rams got a couple high picks because of that RG3 trade. So I think it's better to wait a year, and I think like a Teddy Bridgewater isn't like the end of the world.
Yeah, I would be okay with Teddy Bridgewater, but it still goes against what I ultimately want. Because if you get Teddy Bridgewater, if he plays well, like, is he going to be your future, or is he just another stopgap until you go through this whole process again?
No, he's the future. He's 26 years old.
Okay, so you're fully invested in it. And it depends how he plays too. Like if he balls out where you thought this is what you wanted out of your quarterback, then you kind of make that choice and you just go all in with Teddy Bridgewater. But I'm just so drunk over Tua Tagovailoa, whatever the hell his name is. That's the guy I want.
Dude, I Minkah Fitzpatrick's been awesome, but Alabama players and a quarterback.
Yeah, that's the one scary thing.
I don't know if I can do that, dude. I don't know if I can trust that.
Yeah, I mean there is that risk, that you get a quarterback from Alabama and he's just he only has so much more room to peak because he's already peaked so early and he's really good in college, and he comes to the NFL and he can only go so far after that.
In the preseason, like we mentioned quite a bit how Dolphins Twitter attacks. They're a really good, actually group. If someone wants to come out and say the Dolphins are like the worst team in the league, they'll be like, well, actually, we're like 15th in the league or something like that. Do you remember those conversations?
Yeah, I remember we actually had one ourselves with the schedule talk on how they are not really 3-13. They are more like 6-10. We're just defending the honor of being average or below average. Yeah, that's us.
Well, and we need to defend that. This is an easy clickbait people might have gone up to, but the Reggie Bush tweet that you linked here, I saw it and I retweeted it kind of just to be just to lob it. It wasn't an endorsement. Retweets aren't endorsements.
That was a hard knock season.
Yeah, so Reggie Bush quote tweeted Chad Ochocinco saying, "We could have had something special that year, bruh. 2012. Terrible management from front office and coaching. Imagine this. B. Marshall and Chad on the opposite sides. Devon Best, who was still balling at the time. Brian Hartline, Anthony Fasano, me and Lamar Miller in the backfield. Tannehill rookie year." Well, actually, I believe Marshall said he didn't want to play with a rookie quarterback. Well, actually, Chad Johnson got arrested.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where they want to say oh, it coulda, woulda, shoulda. Yeah, it looks great on paper, but Twitter was around. We knew crazy shit was happening.
Yeah, we knew all that was happening. And we also know that Joe Fibble was worried about shoelaces not being tied on the practice field.
That's true too.
Because of Hard Knocks. That Hard Knocks season was, they drafted Egnew that year too, right?
World-class third-round pick, Michael Egnew.
Yeah, with Mike Sherman completely eviscerating him in a team meeting. But that year was so weird.
I remember writing articles for Cover 32 in 2014 about how that draft class was Miami hit so many home runs with Tannehill. I think their second round.
Vernon that year, if I'm not mistaken, or was he the year after?
Who was that year? Did you say?
Vernon.
I think Vernon was that class. Lamar Miller was that class. Michael Egnew.
Yeah.
Let me just pull up this roster here because I kind of just want, because it was one where I it started Tannehill. At the time, Jonathan Martin was okay. Before that whole thing, Vernon was a third. Egnew was a third.
Yeah, Martin was a second round pick.
Yep. even you got B.J. Cunningham, and you had Rashard Matthews in the 7th round, who was a super steal at the time. But yeah, I remember thinking that was a great draft, and now it's yeesh. Dude, today in the Giants game, Olivier Verdon got penalties, I believe, on 3 straight plays: a roughing the passer, then 2 offsides in a row.
Yeah, he's one of those dudes where I remember that whole offseason when he just wanted to get paid. That's all he wanted to do, and Dolphins fans were so mad. And I will always remember that game against the Jaguars that year, where he got that. It was it was Sue. Like, that was Sue's first year as a Dolphin, and it's when Olivier Vernon got like that roughing the passer on Blake Bortles, and the Dolphins lost that game against the Jets. And that'll always stand out to me, is that game when it comes to Olivier Vernon.
Absolutely terrible. Absolutely freaking terrible. Topher, we have now had some players, quite a bit of reporters, and now NFL execs on the podcast.
Scouts too. We've had analytics scouts with Pro Football Focus.
100% facts. We've had high school head coaches, but I think next on our list we got to get some coaches on the show. I think we've done a good job, and I hope everyone out there is enjoying it. We've hit over 5,000 total downloads in just a few short months, which is pretty exciting. We're always trying to get better. And you can find this podcast, Podbean, iTunes, Spotify. Topher, we're on Twitter. Where are you going to find that? I mean, I see you tweeting about Trump now, Trump and Ryan Tannehill, I guess.
Yes. You can find us at MIA in the Hunt. You can find me on Twitter at Cochran108, Jake at JMendel94. We are on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and if you just want us to send you a link, we have no problem doing that as well.
Exactly. Look later in the week, as we will have our Colts preview up. Probably gonna do that maybe Thanksgiving, day before Thanksgiving, somewhere right around there. So stuff your face with turkey, and then stuff your ears with some Dolphins talk. Fins up.
Fins up.